Thank you for joining us today. Pastor Tanya and I were both leading outdoor worship services yesterday, so we were not able to Zoom our normal service. So for today, I am going to record the gospel reading and my sermon for you from Sunday, the 21st of August. The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 13th chapter. Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his donkey or his ox from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. The Gospel of the Lord. My brother and I loved going to Sunday school when we were kids. We both liked to sing, and there were games and stories and friends. And then when we got home, my mom always made pancakes for lunch. And then it all changed for my brother. He didn't want to go to Sunday school anymore. Mom would make him go, but sometimes he pretended he was sick, just so he could get out of it. Mom finally found out the reason. He was being bullied. His new class consisted of like 5 girls and him. What a recipe for disaster for junior high kids. The girls picked on him, and they made it so that Sunday school was an hour of painful torture for him. The girls would tease him and make him feel like an outsider. They made him feel like he just didn't belong there. He couldn't defend himself, and it must have felt like nobody was around to stand up for him. In today's story, we see bullying of another kind. This is not your average bully. This is a bully who speaks with the authority of a religious leader. This is a bully who commands respect as a servant of God. People turn to this bully for wisdom and counsel when it comes to faith issues because, well, he knows his Bible. He instructs Jesus that there are only certain designated days in each week when he can help people. He orders the woman who has been crippled for 18 years to come back on another day. The leader tells the crowd that there are 6 days of the week to do your work, but the 7th is the Sabbath day, and it is holy because that's what it says in the Bible. Although this religious leader probably knows his Bible, like Old Testament writings, like the back of his hand, he somehow misses the bigger picture of what's actually taking place before his very own eyes. He's so caught up in trying to enforce the rules by defining what is right and wrong that he completely misses that healing miracle. Bullying is still very much a part of today's society. We see it in schools, workplaces, politics, and even in our churches. Bullies like to target people they think are smaller or weaker than themselves. The crippled woman in the story we read today was an easy target. First of all, she's a woman living in ancient Palestine, which means that her position in society was largely predetermined for her. Secondly, she's physically disabled. A pastor was speaking about his parents' country of origin, which happened to be Korea. He wrote, "It amazed me that I did not see any handicap ramps, handicap accessible washrooms, or parking reserved for the handicapped." I asked a Korean native about that, and they said it's because if you are handicapped in Korea, there's a sense of shame, and they hide themselves from society. Can you imagine not leaving your home because of the shame of a physical disability? In Jesus' day, the handicapped would be at the gates of the city begging, but they weren't really part of the normal life of a family. But this woman, who most likely lived a life full of shame, refused to hide herself from the public's disapproving eyes. She summoned the courage to meet Jesus, and she is rewarded when he heals her. Her celebration, though, is cut short when that religious leader chooses to make an example of Jesus and the woman, reprimanding them both for breaking the rules by violating the Sabbath. And worst of all, he's right. The Bible does say to keep the Sabbath holy. Bullying is not only restricted to individuals, but also to groups of people. Large majority groups can use their collective size and authority to bully smaller groups of people, making them feel like they don't belong. The smaller group becomes an easy target. We have seen multiple examples of this over the years. Racism, sexism, ageism, all of those isms we could put together in this. It's a form of bullying. It's a form of trying to make someone think that they are less than you are. Since the days of Jesus, there have been Christian groups who have used the rules laid out in the Bible as justification to bully minority groups. Hitler often referenced some of the gospel stories that portrayed Jews as Jesus killers in order to support his campaign to eradicate the Jewish people. Slave owners in the United States often cited New Testament books like 1 Peter to justify their exploitation of African people. And still to this day, some men use the writings of St. Paul to support their position against the ordination of women as pastors in the church. These Christian groups who acted like bullies point to the Bible and defend themselves by saying, we're just following the rules that are laid out in the Bible. But in the gospel reading, Jesus throws us a bit of a curveball. Jesus tells us that love and justice are just as important as the rules. He doesn't tell the religious leader that he's wrong, but he calls him and his followers hypocrites. He said, "Don't you on the Sabbath untie your ox and lead it to some water?" What Jesus is saying is that it's one thing to understand the rules in our Bible on an intellectual level. We can memorize them, recite them, and abide by them. But it's another thing to understand the rules from our Bible with our hearts. This means that we try our best to follow these rules by living out our lives with love and compassion. Jesus challenges the leader's understanding of the Bible and tries to reform and reshape his perception of who God is and what God wants from his people. God continues to challenge and reform our understanding of how we follow the rules in the Bible. I don't think this story's focus is on that physical healing of the woman, as miraculous as that was, and especially for her. Instead, the message that is trying to be conveyed is that when we look at our Bible, the rules can never be separated from love. At the beginning, Jesus calls the crippled woman not by her name, he just calls her woman. But after he heals her, Jesus calls her not only daughter, but daughter of Abraham. Jesus heals her and gives her status as a child of God. God's ministry and message is that God's rules can never be separated from love and compassion. If that religious leader had his way, we would have had this bowed over woman suffer and wait another day until the Sabbath was over before allowing her to be healed. But Jesus' love never can wait. Jesus stood up and looked the bully square in the eyes and said, "What I have to offer this woman is more important than your understanding of the rules." The religious leader wanted to keep this woman excluded, but Jesus made her a part of the family. Jesus made her whole again. And for the first time in 18 years, she felt like she belonged. You can hear some religious leaders today try to define how Christians should live their lives. They try to come across as the authority on morals and values based on the rules that are spelled out in the Bible. But sometimes when they try so hard to define how people should live, they miss out on the more important message that Jesus brought with him, that love can never be separated from the rules. Jesus has shown us in this story that the welfare of a human being is just as important as religious obligations, such as the observance of the Sabbath. And Jesus continues to show us the love for our neighbor and making them feel that they are a part of God's community is just as important as the rules that define our faith. As Christians, it is vital that we take seriously what God has to say to us through the Bible. The rules act as moorings, providing direction for our lives, providing a stability. And these moorings are invaluable to us when we look to them for guidance on moral, ethical, and political issues. But in today's story, Jesus demonstrates that the spirit in which we interpret these rules is just as important as the rules themselves. He shows us that we do not first know the truth and then apply it. Rather, it is in our action, in confronting injustice and oppression, that truth is really known and validated. Just as Jesus tried to reform the attitude of the religious leader 2,000 years ago, Jesus continues to reform our attitudes. Jesus' healing of the crippled woman on the Sabbath allows us to look at the rules that define our faith with a renewed and renewing spirit of love and compassion. And when we do this, we can start making those easy targets of today feel God's love, and in the process, we will all be transformed. Thank you for joining us today.